Everything's rendered. I've opened After Effects, and let's just have a quick look at the output files, and you can see here's the directory, and we've got our ambient pass, diffuse, and there's our object buffers. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom here, you can see we also have an AEC file. Now Mac OS has decided this is some diagnostic report, which it isn't. So if I double click that, that'll probably open the wrong thing. I could set this in my get info, but no worries. I've got the plugin in After Effects, so there's a few ways you can do this. You can like drag it onto your After Effects icon, you can choose to import it into your project, or you can just simply like drag it and drop onto your project window. And you can see that what happens is it opens up, brings in a folder called Special Passes, and these are our object buffers. We've got a solid in here, which is our screen. So this is the external compositing tag that we used, and if we open this up, you can see we have a comp that's been created, and here are all of our passes. Now I'm just going to call this 3D renders, and I'm going to just drag all of my renders into here, and I'm going to call this comps, so it sits at the top. I'm sure you've all got your own way of managing your After Effects projects. So if we open up this comp and have a look, you can see that what we have in the timeline is we have all of our render passes, and you can see that the composite mode has been set correctly. We have a null object in here, screen. If we scrub through, you can see kind of matches. Not scrubbing very well. I've also got some lights, and these are the lights that we had in our 3D scene. They've been brought in as After Effects lights, so which means that you can use very similar settings for your lights within After Effects, and obviously that will then affect your 3D layers. Now I'm not going to use the lights in this example, so I'm just going to disable those, and let's actually just set them to shy and hide shy layers. You could delete them, but it's handy to keep them just in case you want them later on. And we also have a camera, and the camera is an After Effects camera, and hopefully this should match the animation that we placed onto our Cinema 4D camera. Now when you're in Cinema 4D, there's no reason why you can't go back into that render settings save dialog, and you can actually just save the AEC out on its own without having to render. So if you've rendered and for instance you forgot an external compositing tag on one of your objects, those kind of things, then you can simply go back in and save the AEC alone and just re-import that and copy and paste the camera into your comp with all your renders, and it should all just match up. Of course, if you reanimate the camera or anything like that, it's not going to match up with your animation. But if you just want to say, oh, I need to add in another reference point on another object, you can just add in an external compositing tag and save out the AEC. If we press U to see all our keys, you can see that we've got a key on every frame, so it's not easy to adjust this within here. It's basically baking out that animation. And one of the things that you might notice in this is that it actually looks totally different. And the reason it looks totally different is because we're not using color management within our After Effects project, and we're not comping it in linear color space. So as well as setting up your color management on output and making sure you output 16-bit in linear color, you also need to make sure you set up your After Effects project correctly as well. To enable color management, you simply come to the file menu, come down to project settings, and here we have working space. Now we can set this to sRGB. You can set that to any other working space you like, but sRGB seems to make most sense. But one thing you do need to do is make sure you enable linearize working space. And this will mean that we're working in linear color space. And if you look at the render at the moment, now when I click OK, you can see that actually it changes to look correct. And this is now looking the same as the render that we were looking at in Cinema 4D. There's another thing you can do as well, is to open up your 3D renders and just select some of your render passes, and you can see here it tells you the profile that's been interpreted as. Because we're working with Photoshop sequences, the profile is embedded. However, if you were working with a format that didn't support that, like QuickTime Movie for instance, you would need to make sure that you go into your interpret footage dialog. So if we just come into interpret footage main, and under color management, embedded profile, you can see it here. But if it wasn't an embedded profile, then you would have to assign it an alternative color profile or interpret as linear light. It really depends on what you were looking at. The other thing that you should remember is that if you're working with elements like normal pass or maybe a depth pass, those kind of things, very often you don't want to interpret those in linear color space. You want to keep them in the color space that they were rendered in. So you might need to enable the preserve RGB option. This is one of the reasons why it's cool to use a format that supports embedded color profiles, but there's no reason that you don't. The only thing to remember is that you need to make sure to interpret your files correctly, because After Effects will probably guess that they're sRGB, in which case your comp will all look incorrect. But you know what it looks like in 3D, so if it doesn't look right, the chances are you either haven't got color management on, you've interpreted them incorrectly, or they haven't got like an embedded color profile and you need to set that interpretation. The other thing that we should really do is enable 16-bit. I'm actually going to leave it on 8-bit. I can't see any banding, but you should comp in 16-bit with multipass. But if you don't see any visible banding, then it's not really any problem to work in 8-bit. But if you do, just alt-click on down here to enable 16-bit, and it should all look lovely. Okay, let's come back to our comp. Let's just make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to just fit up to 100% just so that we can kind of see everything at the same time. I'm also just going to hide that screen now so we don't see that. So one of the things that I said we could do is replace the screen. So let's have a look at replacing the screen first of all. Included in the download was a couple of JPEGs, and one of them is used on the screen here. And there's another one which is very similar. If we come to the beginning, you can see that this doesn't look like it's on a screen. So I've included one that's got like a mosaic effect to it. I'm just going to import that image. Of course, you can use any image you like, but here's the one that I included. It's in the 3D texture folder, but by all means, just bring in any image, or it could be a comp that you use or an animation, whatever you want to replace on the screen. But you can see here it's exactly the same, but the difference is that I've kind of created a mosaic type effect just so it looks a little bit more like the pixels on a screen in a sort of stylized kind of way. You wouldn't really want your screen to look like that. If we come back to the comp and we just drag this in, okay, obviously if we come through our animation, that's not having anything to do with it. So the first thing we need to do is make sure this layer is set to 3D. And now it's just disappeared out of view. But we've got this screen null, which is telling us where our screen is. And if we come to the different points, you can see, updates with the position of the screen in the 3D render. So we can take our mosaic image that we've added, and we can simply just parent that to our screen. And if we press P and then hold down Shift and press R to bring up our position and rotation controls, if we just zero these out first of all, and let's just zero out the orientation, you can see there's our image. Now the iPod that I created was actually to scale, but it was I think 90 centimeters in Cinema 4D, so it's like 10 times bigger than a real iPod, but it's still quite small. So the JPEG that I've supplied here is huge, but you can see that it's it's at the right orientation. If we just press S for scale and then let's just scale this down. And you can see now that the anchor point of that null is quite important. And remember I said that you could change that in the external compositing tag. And you can see here it's up in the top left of that object. But no worries, I'm not really too worried about that. It's a simple setup. So what we can do is we can literally just kind of grab this and pull it across, and obviously pull it down a little bit. Something like so, and we can just continue scaling it down. If you hold down Command or Control when you scrub these values, then they will scale much slower. And that's not looking too bad. Let's just bring up position, and we can just fine tune that position a little bit. And I just want to use the frame of this screen to just position it in the right place. So you can see it is quite important to set that anchor point, but it's not the end of the world if you get it wrong. So there we go. So we've positioned that in the right place. Obviously it's, you can't see the frame from the screen anymore, but let's just press 0 to do a quick RAM preview and see what happens. So the first thing you'll notice is that obviously that 3D layer is visible as the phone spins around, but other than that it's looking pretty good. You know, it's matching up with the move. You know, that's enough, and we can see that that's looking cool. So we also rendered out an object buffer for the screen itself, and this is our object buffer 2, I believe. And if we open that up and just scrub through, you can see there we go. So if we use this for a matte, hopefully it will hide our screen in the right place. So come back to the comp, grab the object buffer 2, let's just drop that in above our mosaic, select the mosaic, and under track matte let's just set this to be Luma matte and choose our object buffer like so. And there you go. And now you can see, if we just come up to full screen, you can see that we can indeed see our frame and everything correctly. Now, one of the things with this setup that you can't really see but would happen in a lot of renders is that this wouldn't really match your 3D render, this layer, but because it's a screen and it's luminant, you know, we can't really see that in this example, and everything looks cool. You know, there's not a lot we need to do to that. But because this is glass, if this was you know, wasn't luminant, we'd get reflections on top of there. But we have all of our passes separately. So you could use this same matte to cut out the reflection and then composite that over the top. If we come down here, there's our reflection. We can solo that layer. There isn't actually any reflection on that screen. But if there was, we could use that matte to composite that same reflection over. Or we could simply take that reflection pass and place it on top of that image. There's lots of different things that you can do. So that's a really simple example of how to use the AEC to do a basic screen replacement. And let's just render that and make sure that everything looks as expected. And I'll just show you a few other things that we can do with our multipass render. And there we go. And of course, you know, if your client comes in and wants a different screen there, or if they say, okay, I want it pixelated there, but when it's here, I don't want it pixelated, you could do a transition between the two. Or in this example, because it spins round, you could simply take that mosaic screen and you could like trim it off at that point so it switches off, and we're back to the original render at this time. Okay, let's have a look at a few other things that we can do with this. Because we have all of the passes as separate layers, we can isolate any one of them, like the reflection, for instance, or we can take the ambient, and the ambient is like got a really nice sheen on it. I'm not sure that we can see that so much in the render. So you know, we could take this for example, and we could add effects to this. So we could just do some simple color correction, like add curves to it, and we can really bring that highlight up. You know, so that it's much brighter, and perhaps it, you know, make it a little bit more contrasty, like so. So, you know, not a huge difference, but if you look at that, you can see that we've done a little bit of color correction just on that one highlight. You know, we could even be a lot more dramatic, and we could take like the diffuse, and we could say, okay, what I want to do here is I'm going to add in some hue saturation. And we can like adjust the hue, and we can say, all right, well actually I want this to be, you know, like maybe a blue phone, something like so. And we can take that effect and we could apply that to our ambient as well, so that we have like a nice blue highlight. And perhaps we need to apply that to our reflection, and we've got our reflection on the floor there. So if we just paste that in, hold on, wrong layer, and there we go, and you can see now we've got like a blue reflection. You can't actually see the reflection at the moment. That was one of the other things that I said that we would do, is we just like replace the background and use the shadow and the reflection and drop in our own After Effects background. So come back to the project window, let's grab this this comp, and let's just create a new comp, and if we just come down, say here, come to our 3D renders, we have our object buffer 1, which if you remember was for the iPod, and let's just drag this in, and we just set our comp underneath to be Luma matte, and now we have just our iPod, and we have transparency there, so I can add in a new layer, drop this underneath, and I can then say, okay, let's just generate a ramp, and I'm going to set the top to be white, and I'm going to set the bottom to be like dark blue, like so. So now you can see our phone just sitting on a regular After Effects solid. If we come back to our project window and we open up our 3D renders, here we have like a shadow pass, so we can drop that in and we can just set that to be multiply, and that's going to multiply over our solid. So now we've got our shadow casting onto our After Effects layer. We've also got our reflection. If we drop that in, let's put that at the top, and you can see there it is, how we've got the color correction missing off of there. So I'm just going to paste the same effect on, and if we set this to add, and now you can see we have our reflection. Of course, we've doubled that up now. If you look at the actual iPod, we're getting this white around the edge, and if we drag it underneath, you can see the white is affecting the edges here. That's not really the effect that we want. As I let's just come in a bit closer, and you can see that there's a problem there. Oh, wrong one there. So you can see that reflection is adding in like a bit of a pixel of white at the edges. So to get around that, you can simply use the same object buffer 1, and let's just solo our reflection. Now this can cause slight problems because of the anti-aliasing of the buffer and your objects, but there are definitely ways to get around this. Let's just have a look what happens. If we take the Luma inverted matte, let me just pull this up so you can see. We take the Luma inverted matte of our object buffer 1, okay, and you can see there we go. So now we've isolated our reflection on the floor, but we do have this slight problem with the anti-aliasing of the object buffer. So we've got this white line kind of showing through, and we definitely don't want that to happen. So there's a way that you can get around that, and let's just switch on our buffer. I'm going to solo this one element for a moment. If we take this and instead of using it as a Luma matte, we convert this into an alpha, we can then choke that a very tiny amount, and we can use that with an alpha track matte. So with the buffer selected, come up to effects and choose channel set matte, and then for the matte we want to choose the luminance. If we just open up the checkerboards, you can see there we go, there's our checkerboard. So you can see we've now added in some transparency. Let's unsolo this and just hide it, and we set our track matte to be alpha inverted matte now. You're not going to see any difference, but what we can then do is we can take our object, and because we now have an alpha channel on there, we can come down and we can just add something like matte simple choker, and we can then choke that matte. And if we choke that matte one way, you can see there we go. So I've gone miles too far. We're losing our reflection at the bottom here, but we've lost it at the side as well. So let me just set that back to 0 and do that a little bit more slowly. So if we just pull that into negative numbers, and you can just see this white edge just disappear, and we want to set that, there you go. So about 1.7 looks pretty good, and now we've managed to kind of tighten up that composite a bit more. So what we've got now is we've got our phone with a different screen, and we've placed it onto an After Effects background. We've still got our shadow, we've still got our reflection. You know, 10-15 minutes work, not even that in After Effects. And of course, if it's a real project and you're going to spend time grading all of these features with your separate mattes, with your separate passes and your external compositing exchange options, give you like loads more power within After Effects. So there we go. So that brings us to the end of this part of the tutorial. We're going to move on to some more I'd say advanced. They're not really any more advanced. We're going to do a little bit of espresso and a few other things which will give you even more control when you're working with the exchange. So let's just save this, and we're going to go back to Cinema 4D and set up a different project now and move on.